and we're back with another Mission Impossible episode review. This time we've got the Revival series, Season 1, Episode 14, which is called Spy. Not The Spy, as we had back in Season 2 of the original. This one's just called Spy. And no, the two episodes have nothing to do with each other. So, we start this one off in Central Africa. At least that's what the byline says. A guy named Crosby pulls up to a village where all the people and animals have died, starts recording a report and taking pictures, indicating that this is the work of a man named Christie. Unbeknownst to him, Christie is watching him from a ways away and tells his man Carl to kill him, which he does. Jim goes to Chinatown and uses some Cantonese spy speak to locate his disc player. As a note, I tried to use translation tools to figure out what is being said during this conversation. I couldn't get a proper translation of what Jim is saying, probably because of the accented way that he's speaking. He's speaking phonetically, obviously. However, it is pretty clear what the lady is speaking to him in Cantonese. After he says his first statement, the woman replies something to the effect of, "The sunset is so beautiful." And then after his second statement, she says, "There is something behind the bunk that you should look at." Multiple tools use the word bunk, which I assume means like barrier or bed or something like that. Just thought I'd throw that out there. So the mission. John Christie used to work for MI6. He went rogue some years ago and now has purchased a huge amount of chemicals that could only mean that he's developing some kind of chemical weapon. The IMF must find and destroy his plant. In the apartment scene, we learn that Christie has a massive amount of diamonds to sell in order to finance this operation, which includes hiring mercenaries for security, and also that the team has enlisted a KGB doctor named Yuri Nikolai to assist with disposing of the chemicals safely, as the Soviet Union also wants to see Christie's threat eliminated. Off we go to Christie's place, a place called Elephant House, which is now a hotel and tavern, among other things. In the bar, there's a fight taking place between Carl and some other musclehead, as Max and Grant enter to watch the festivities. It takes some doing, but Carl wins the fight, and Grant approaches Christie, says he and Max need work, and Christie tells him to talk to Security Chief Carl, which he does with his fists and is able to beat him down thanks to Grant's specially prepared ring, which earns them the jobs. Nicholas arrives at the place as an old Monsignor who lived in Elephant House for a while, meeting up with Shannon as reporter Carol Morgan, and they stage a conversation about writing the Monsignor's biography for Christie's benefit. Meanwhile, Jim meets with Yuri, with whom he has some history of jockeying against during missions, at the site where the chemical weapons were tested, and the doctor is making progress figuring out what exactly was used. Yuri warns Jim that Christie may still have a lot of information from his time as an agent, and he should be careful. Christie scans the mugs given to Grant and Max for prints. Their stories check out. Jim arrives at the hotel as a Dutch diamond dealer to meet Christie about the sale of his goods, and sees Max and Grant board the bus for their new employment. Carl warns Max that he was lucky once, but won't be again if Max crosses him. They find that Christie is using an old sugar mill as his plant, finding the chemical storage area, and are put on night guard duty. While Jim has some dinner with Christie, Christie offers him drinks multiple times in an effort to get Jim's fingerprints. Nicholas and Shannon come in and start chatting. Jim claims to have a dislike for priests, acting very annoyed when Christie is forced to listen to some of Nicholas's old stories, and is told that Nicholas spent a lot of time as a boy in what's called the Lion's Suite, which is actually Christie's office now, and would like to go up just to reminisce for a few moments. Jim threatens to leave abruptly, causing Christie to cut the conversation short and get his African girlfriend, interestingly named Heather, not sure how that happens, to take the two of them up to his office, telling her to watch them closely. She does so, but Nicholas is very adeptly able to plant a bug on one of the chairs. Nick comments that everything seems to be going great. Famous last words. Jim and Christie adjourn to his office, where he opens the safe to show Jim the diamonds, allowing Nicholas to get the combination thanks to the bug. While Jim makes a show of examining the diamonds, Christie activates his camera and his computer, which quickly determines Jim's identity, and Christie pulls out his pistol, telling Jim he's been found out. Christy muses that Jim doesn't work alone, so they must be on to his little project, and finds the bug, realizing Nicholas's role in the plan. Shannon causes an electrical short, killing the lights and allowing Jim to escape, but he does take a bullet. Nicholas manages to sneak behind Christy and slug him unconscious, finding Jim badly hurt, but Jim tells him to get the diamonds so that the plan can proceed. And they manage to join Shannon in their Jeep, heading to their camp with Dr. Nikolai. Yuri tells Jim that he needs immediate surgery or else he could bleed to death, and Jim gets Nicholas to tell Grant and Max to return as the mission's been blown. Christy awakes and sees as he's lost his diamonds, warns Carl about the newcomers who have managed to get to the plant's control room, but they get the message about the failed mission. They're found by Carl and the guards, and Max wants to destroy the chemicals on the way out, but Grant reminds him they don't know how lethal they are, and there's a die-hard level gunfight as the two manage to escape on a minibus. They send a message to the others indicating they're safe and watching the mill from afar, and Jim wants Grant to come to their camp as he has an idea, given that Christy will think that they have abandoned their mission. The next morning, the team outlines their new plan. Christy is getting new financing arranged, so they have to move fast. Dr. Nikolai has discovered the chemical he's using. Reports are circulated that Shannon and Jim are dead, and they decide to stage an accident with the Jeep, putting the diamonds inside, and giving Shannon a drug so that she appears to be dead, for Christy to find, which he quickly does. Grant goes back to the mill, scans the labels of the various chemicals in it, evading the guards again, and the doctor determines that by switching two of the labels, they'll create an impressive but chemically harmless explosion. So the three healthy IMF men go back to do the switch. Christy arrives the next day, having sold the diamonds, to give a demonstration to his terrorist backers, with the workers using the mislabeled chemicals. An alarm goes off due to the mixture not being right, alerting Carl, who finds the three trying to get away. So it's time for a rematch with Max, with Grant and Nick staving off the other guards. Max manages to knock Carl down once again so the three can escape as Christy discovers the false labels. He heads to his Jeep, telling Carl to take care of the backers as he drives off, and Jim laments that they didn't get him. But as the plant goes up in an explosion, Yuri reminds him that the mission was to destroy the plant and Christie's production. So it's a success. Mission accomplished, I guess. This episode is another difficult one to grade for a lot of reasons that I'll go over. The grade that I'm kind of settling on, surprisingly for me, is somewhere in the B- C+ range. This is another one very similar to the episode a few ago called The Greek. I watch it and I'm trying to think about it, and I'm then all of a sudden, like, every fiber of my being is saying to myself, what did I just watch? Like, what's going on here? The problem that I had in The Fixer, maybe just to kind of reiterate it a little bit, is, okay, these are the characters, this is Mission Impossible, it is the show, but, it just doesn't feel right. They're doing something that they shouldn't be doing, and they're doing it in a way that does not befit the IMF. This is a little bit different, but I have the same kind of feeling. Let me talk through it a little bit. First of all, let me just say that Tim Hughes as John Christie is good. Good actor, good character. Christie is a competent enough villain, and he avoids the kiss of death, all the three kisses of death. He is a little bit on the lame side. Every villain is to some extent. That's why I went into this thinking, oh yeah, we have a really competent villain. That's a key factor, usually the most important factor, in an episode being good, especially in the revival. But when I look at this episode, even-handedly, fairly, and critically, I see a lot of things here that I don't particularly like. Let me also start out by saying that I think that, there seems to be something kind of going on here in terms of the writers, producers, the people who are in charge. This is an episode that kind of expands the IMF universe. They're working with, there's talk of MI6. That never happened before. Maybe they were kind of alluded to in one of the original episodes, like Lovers Not, where the IMF actually, did some operations in the United Kingdom. We also mentioned the KGB specifically. Now, we did have the KGB mentioned in the previous episode, The Wall, but now the IMF is actually working alongside the KGB, or at least one of their operatives. I think that this is deliberate. The producers could have made it so that, Christie was a rogue American agent, but they make him a rogue MI6 agent. They could have had an American doctor as the guest agent, but instead they choose to have, Shane Bryant, who is an Australian actor, playing a Russian. There's obviously something deliberate there. It's hard to gauge to what extent and why, but I think that it is there. Moving back to what actually happens in this episode, I mentioned how Christie is a very competent villain, but that is not really the issue here. Him being competent is almost a non-factor, really, which is hard to believe. This episode is actually driven by Jim Phelps being, I can't believe I'm saying this, careless, borderline incompetent, especially after the last episode, The Fixer, where there was, so much talk where Jim makes a point to himself and the audience about how important it is to pay attention to detail and to be meticulous and plan ahead and all of those things. And, for Jim Phelps to trip over his own feet as badly as he does here is so jarring and striking to me now that I watch it again. Yeah, it's tough for me to get over. I watched this when it first came out in 1989. I remember catching the series and falling in love with it then. I taped it on VHS. Remember those VHS tapes? Yeah. I had this one and some other episodes, both from the original and from the revival here on those tapes. I watched them over and over and over again. I remember The Killer was one of them from the original series, The Innocent from the original series, The Pawn and the Lions from the revival, and some others. I had 2 or 3 tapes. And I remember loving this episode primarily for the fact that, oh my gosh, they're going up against a competent villain. Now looking back at it, I realized that, boy, I was kind of way off on that. Jim really messes this one up badly. Also, I should point out that clearly the plan by the writer of this episode, Michael Fisher, was that the IMF was going to have a round 2 with Christie. That doesn't happen. This episode only works, Jim messes up. Okay, let's move on from that. There's some contrived luck at the end. Yeah, Christie gets away. That's obviously what they wanted to accomplish. Just to put a bow on that a little bit, Jim's plan is to not give Christie the opportunity to identify him by not giving him fingerprints to do so. I just can't believe that Jim wouldn't think about what would he do in those circumstances. If he wasn't able to get prints from somebody, wouldn't he do something like Christie does in order to figure out who this person is? I don't know what else to say about that. It's just not good. I should point out something else that is a little bit good. The Morse codish SMS device the IMF uses in order to send messages, Max and Grant and the rest of the team, is somewhat prescient. I actually had to look it up because to me it almost looks like kind of like a prototype BlackBerry or something like that. And I thought, boy, Research in Motion, the company that invented BlackBerry, did that even exist? And I looked it up. I should know this. They're a Canadian company. They actually did start the company in 1984, and they were developing some prototypes around the time that this episode would have been filmed. I wonder whether, the producers might have gotten a hold of one of those things. or something like it, or based an idea off of it. Another interesting piece of gadgetry, which I'm not sure gets used going forward, but I could be wrong about that, is the ability to hear the tumblers on a safe using a very, very specific kind of bug that they put in Christie's room. It'll be interesting to see if that comes up again. I don't recall it. But again, overall, the weirdness of this episode, despite Christie's competence, just really, I can't give it really a good grade. This episode is big on A-Team stuff, with all the gunplay and the explosions and the fighting, the fisticuffs and all of that sort of thing. It fits the story of what's going on here to have that stuff. But so if this was any other show, I would say, okay, well, it's that kind of show. It's like, a crime drama, and they just happen to have a lot of this kind of stuff going on. But it's out of place for Mission Impossible. The IMF is not really for this kind of thing, where, we have to have Rambo or Die Hard-esque action. Sometimes that's okay to have it interspersed in certain situations where it does make sense. But the IMF is not out there to go in with guns blasting. That's not what they're about. And on further analysis, I see that was really added because the plot is very thin. There's not a lot to this plot. All that stuff is just padding. There is more than the necessary dialogue that just explains the action and what's going on. Shannon and Nicholas are talking about what exactly the bug is going to do. Nicholas saying, "Oh, we're in business, where everything's going perfectly so far." And later on, the conversation had with Shannon, "Oh, I'm going to be window dressing to sell this to Christie," rather than just kind of letting it unfold. Too much padding in this one with the action and with the bad dialogue. Really, the fact that they have a competent villain to go after is the only thing that raises the grade of this episode. And it's usually the other way around. It's usually that you have, a well-crafted story and a lame villain brings it down. This is the only episode I can think of in terms of reviews that I've done where it's kind of the opposite of that. Just to finish up with some callbacks, I thought this through and I said to myself, okay, what does this episode remind me of? Before I go there, I thought about, as I usually do, when the episode goes awry. And lots of episodes have had it where things happen and the IMF have to kind of rethink, their techniques and what they're going to do. So I thought about it and I said, okay, what was Jim's original plan here? They would steal the diamonds. That's obvious. Dr. Nikolai would figure out the chemical formula of, whatever it is that Christie is manufacturing. Okay. And then the IMF is going to find some way to do what they did anyway, which was to sabotage his production. And I thought about that and I said, okay, they basically do accomplish the skeleton of the mission even before they decide to kind of, ramp things up a little bit. As Shannon said, even after Christie lost the diamonds, he found other financing. He found another way to keep his production going. So even if the IMF had actually fulfilled their plan and everything had gone the way that it should have, they wouldn't have exactly have put Christie out of business. There's something missing there, I feel. They still could have destroyed the plant, I suppose. They still could have found a way, but there's just something lacking in the overall mission here. I'm guessing that it has something to do with the fact that, he'd have to start over and that would cause him to not be able to get financing. Maybe he only got money on the basis that, look, I still have all of these chemicals and I still have a plant. I can still accomplish this. And maybe without having that to present to, potential backers, that may not have happened. That seems like a little bit of a stretch to me. And again, like I said, there's just so much weirdness going on in this episode. Just to come back to the callbacks, I thought of a lot of them. The first one that I thought of in terms of, has it ever come about that an IMF agent has wrecked a mission just by being careless? And the only thing that occurs to me, stay with me on this, in the episode The Exchange, yes, it's a fantastic episode. Let's not go there again. I ranked it number 6 in the big ranking list, okay? And I mentioned that the only problem in that episode is Cinnamon Carter leaves a window open for what I feel is not a very good reason. But that is not that's very, very different than this scenario, where it was just something that was just a happenstance. Here is something that could have and should have been avoided. That actually kind of begins the mission in a sense. What happens with Cinnamon Carter. It doesn't really change what the IMF has to do in terms of the mission per se. So I thought about other ones, and the other ones that I looked at all had in common that the IMF doesn't actually really mess up. There are other third parties that mess things up, or just circumstances happen that the IMF could not have predicted and were not under their control. Here are just some examples. The pilot episode, Terry Targo, the safecracker, his fingers are broken. The IMF couldn't have predicted that. So they have to do a rethink and say, okay, well, we have to accomplish the mission, but we have to do it a different way. There's Old Man Out from the first season. They have to rescue Cardinal Vosek. They're prepared to do it, but he's taken to solitary, and they can't do it the way that they wanted to do it, so they have to do it a different way. The controllers, Colonel Borodin, who they planned to have as part of a trial, gets shot, and the IMF has to accomplish the mission in a completely different way. Several of them. A couple more that I'll just mention just to give you an idea of kind of where I'm going, what I'm thinking about this. There was the episode in season 5 called The Field, where Paris has to impersonate a guy named Arthur Norris, if you recall that. But then Arthur Norris kills his girlfriend, and so that causes a whole lot of problems. And then the IMF have to completely, rethink their entire plan. And then, and the other one that I thought of is in the season 6 episode, Bagwoman. That's the one where everything goes wrong, and that was a fun episode to review. Barney's impersonating somebody. His cover is completely blown. That doesn't actually require the IMF to rethink their plan. They just kind of have to scramble to keep their shambles of a plan going in the right direction. Probably the closest callback to this episode, it's still very, very different, would probably be, the controllers, or maybe The Field is a little bit of a better one, where, the female agent in the first case, it was Dina Merrill's character, or in The Field, it was Leslie Warren, it was Dana. The female agent has to put herself at some risk to kind of revive the mission and keep it going, much like Shannon does here. But there really isn't an episode where the IMF is like, well, our first shot completely didn't work. And, because of a mistake that we made, something that we should have anticipated. And then they decide to take a second shot at the mission. One episode that I also did think of in terms of that, in the very early episode in season 1, the Legend, where the IMF is tracking a bunch of Nazis. That was the Let Me Be Your Führer episode. And Dan Briggs goes in and tries to look at the Martin Bormann person who Rudd has sort of revived from the dead sort of thing. And Dan gets electrocuted when he tries to enter Bormann's room. That was, but I question whether that's something that he could have been fully prepared of. And more to the point, they had a plan B. They're like, well, if we can't actually get at the guy, We have a plan B of getting at him another way. And here, I think the big difference, just to kind of, bring it all together, is there was no plan B. Jim was just so confident that his main plan was going to work, and it doesn't, because of something that he could have easily, and could and should have easily been able to prevent. And that's him getting identified and detected. Yeah, boy, that's a tough one. And man, it really messes up what could have been a much better episode. Had the series lasted long enough that they could have wrapped this up and had the part 2 with Christy, I wonder how that might have changed the way that I look at this episode. Unfortunately, we'll never know. Because, spoiler alert, it doesn't happen. Anyway, I think I'm going to end it here. This has gone much longer than I thought it would. Thank you guys, as always, for watching. Please like this review video. This is the usual spiel. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And please leave your comments about this and other episodes. Thank you again, and I'll see you next time.